Welcome to our weekend podcast. To the contrary, I am Charlie Sykes. We have a week of stuff to get through, and who better than the professor himself, Tom Nichols, staff writer at The Atlantic magazine, old friend of the show. How you doing, Tom? I got questions for you.
I'm good, Charlie. Good to see you again.
Okay. We're going to work up to the big stuff. I got to ask you this question. Okay, so Donald Trump has decided in his spare time, running the world and then shitifying the economy, that he wants to have a $200 million new dining room in the White House, which will be covered in gold. I mean, you know, apparently he's decided that I have to make this literally the Gilded Age. Now, he's already done this with the Oval Office. You've seen that?
It's I don't think, I didn't coin this, but that style that is, you know, Walmart Liberace.
Well, that's better than the deeply offensive comment that I read, you know, referring it to Slovenian whorehouse chic. I don't know, but I mean, you know, apparently at some point he's thinking, this looks like the Palace of Versailles or something like that. And so the question I had for you was, what is it about autocrats in general that they always have such bad art taste? They always want to have the gaudy gilded stuff, or maybe it's just Trump. What do you think? You know?
No, I mean, I think there is a there does seem to be kind of autocrats want to externalize their sense of power, right? They want to show people, look, I'm golden eagles and giant soaring, arches, and because by their nature they are not humble citizens. I mean, FDR, it was when FDR died and Truman moved in. I mean, they had to he'd been in there for 12 years and let the White House basically go to seed. Yeah. Because it just wasn't, amazingly, FDR, his priority wasn't like, gussying.
They had a war, depression,
World War, right?
Distractions.
But Trump, this thing he wants to put in, this ballroom. First of all, it's going to be an ugly scab on the Washington, downtown Washington landscape. But for what? I mean, it's going to be. I think George Conway did a thing of the, the downtown DC hotel where the White House correspondence dinner is. This gigantic place, and it's going to be like twice the size of that. And I mean, bigger than a football field, apparently.
But it is a little bit like the alleged comedy shows where they would show like the prime minister of Azerbaijan and he's in this gigantic, what country am I thinking of? Just these gigantic palaces that are just almost obscene in their overplay. Well, it's also very clear that he wants to leave his mark, and this is a really deeply offensive analogy, but when my dogs want to leave their mark, they pee on something, and Donald Trump's like, I want everyone to always remember that I was here, right? I mean, I'm gonna get rid of that Kennedy Rose Garden. We're gonna build the Trump wing of all this. By the time this is over, you know what's going to happen? You're going to have this giant golden statue of Donald Trump placed, atop the Washington Monument. And it's going to happen.
Or replacing the Washington Monument. Why should we have a big, boring piece of chalk sitting across from the White House when we could have, a big statue of Donald Trump?
That's right. That's what makes America. Yeah, that's right. I mean, well, also it's like I'm bigger than Washington, and that's ugly. Look what I can give you, and it would pass the United States Senate by at least one vote.
He doesn't. The thing with Trump that's is part of that narcissistic autocratic personality. He doesn't ever think of himself as a steward of the public trust or public goods or public property.
Yeah,
he thinks the White House belongs to him, and what he wants to do is erase Jack Kennedy and Ronald Reagan and George Bush and Barack Obama and all these other presidents, so that it becomes Mar-a-Lago on the Potomac. And he envisions, I'm sure. Now, first of all, he can only be in office for another 3 years. So building this giant ballroom tells me that he's thinking, well, maybe I could be around longer than that. But, that I'm sure the fantasy is he walks from the residence into this gigundous, kind of plastic Versailles that he's going to create. And there's thunderous applause and people cheering him because that's what he gets at Mar-a-Lago. I mean, the guy disrupts everybody's events in Mar-a-Lago. People are getting married and he walks in like, hey, here I am, walking through a dinner. He doesn't, there's no conception that the government of the United States, the White House, the buildings, the desk, everything, they are not his. They are something that that the people have entrusted to him, or 50% of the people anyway, have entrusted to him as the temporary steward of those things.
And not just the things.
Grasp
I mean,
that.
he's not a steward of the values and all of this. Okay, so along the same lines, what do you make of the story? Again, the 1st of August, what headline do we get? That under pressure from Donald Trump, the Smithsonian has removed references to his impeachments, which feels like almost cartoonishly Orwellian, that you're basically erasing. What do you make of that?
Interesting, too, the way that the Smithsonian did this was to say that only 3 presidents have ever faced a chance of removal: Johnson, Nixon, and Clinton. And that Clinton was in no danger of being removed. I mean, that wasn't going to happen. Nixon wasn't even formally impeached. Had he been impeached, he might well have been. Donald Trump holds the record. He's been impeached twice. And what bothers me is not that Trump pressured. I mean, the Trump team is, it is right out of Borat or, some bad movie about dictatorships. But so the bigger point about the capitulation problem is that, it's, I'm sure in some cases it really is cowardly, and there are people say, oh, we don't want to cross the president. I think the bigger problem is that people are still, these institutions are still having a failure of imagination. And I imagine what they're saying is, look, sign some deal with him, take down the impeachment thing, give him shiny stuff to make him go away.
Right.
And they don't realize that, he's not going to just go away. He'll keep coming back to because it's not just him. I mean, the president himself has the attention span of, that's measured in a half-life of milliseconds.
Right.
But the people around him are really, sort of enjoying this. They are, pushing this, and they are enjoying pushing around institutions that they think of as elitist, and, so they're going to keep doing this. And so I sometimes think it's not that anybody at Harvard or Columbia said, oh, Donald Trump is so awesome and scary. It's that they keep thinking, well, all right, so, we cut a deal. We agree to do this stuff. He goes away. We never really have to do it. He goes on to something else. But, once you've made those deals, that you've put a scar on yourself. I mean, the Smithsonian, right? A place I love, as a former Washingtonian, a place I trust. And I understand why they may be doing this, but
it's embarrassing. It is embarrassing. I mean,
it has a long-term cost.
Right. I mean, and I understand the, hey, just make it go away. But on the other level, you would think that there would be enough grown-ups who would say that is absolutely ridiculous. Go back to the White House and say, we'll look silly, you'll look silly, trying to rewrite history. And I do think it is the capitulation.
Or they should do what Trump does and say, we're looking at it very strongly. We'll get back to you.
Yeah, right. We'll get back to you in 2 weeks about all of that. Or we'll appoint a committee. I mean, part of the problem is that he has surrounded himself with the court, with people who are vying with one another for, can I go to daddy with some other outrage? How can I prove my loyalty? And of course, many of these things are absolutely and completely absurd. So now I want to switch to something a little bit more important, because I was going to hold this for a little bit later. And because I sense, and I did a live stream with Julian Zelizer a little bit earlier. I really feel that there is a historic and political pivot going on, about between America and Israel, and the politics of Israel and Gaza, with many of the strongest supporters of Israel now moving away, the public opinion polls shifting harshly against them. Democrats are divided, Republicans are starting to be divided. Globally and internationally, I think their image is suffering. But I want to talk about Benjamin Netanyahu's, I think many miscalculations. One of them was to join himself so tightly with Donald Trump. He's gone all in with MAGA. I mean, he, and I'm endorsing you for the Nobel Peace Prize. And the problem is that, by doing that, he undermines the bipartisan political support, but also Donald Trump, he apparently didn't get the memo. Donald Trump is not a reliable ally. And so Donald Trump sees some images on television, speaking of the memory of a mayfly. And so where do you see that going? What's going on in Donald Trump's mind and in the politics of Israel, Gaza, and the United States?
There's only one foreign leader who has Donald Trump's unequivocal loyalty, and that's Vladimir Putin.
Was criticized him, though.
He has criticized, and I was going to say, Netanyahu has made the one mistake that that Putin also made, that brought out some anger from Trump, which is that you can do a lot of things to Donald Trump, but you can't make him look stupid. You can't humiliate him. And the war, Trump weeks ago, right? We're almost there, got a hostage release. We're going to, it's close, 2 weeks, it's 10 days. And Netanyahu, just like Putin, is saying, yeah, that's all very interesting, Donald, and I love you, and you're my guy, but I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And so, Trump looks dumb. He looks like a sap. And so I think his attachment to Netanyahu is considerably less than his attachment to some other leaders. And he's also not gotten, again, because Trump is so transactional and so narcissistic. Hey, Charlie, do you remember that we actually did this epical thing and bombed Iran?
Yeah, like 2 weeks ago.
Remember? 3, 2. Who can remember? Because Trump got nothing out of it. He took a hit at home. It didn't solve all the reports that are coming out now are like, well, we got one site, we scratched 2 others, we sort of damaged. It was a huge foreign policy risk done with goading from Netanyahu, who I think Netanyahu, and this was my feeling early on in that conflict, Netanyahu said, I'm going to start this campaign. I'm going to start a campaign that I can't really finish. And I'm going to hope that it drags in the Americans and it turns into regime change. And none of that, well, I think that, there was no way that the Israelis could take out those sites. They knew it. They embarked on this in the hopes that the Americans would say, okay, we're in. But looked at from Donald Trump's point of view. Now, whether you think bombing Iran, I certainly after Iraq, I've been a lot more gun shy. I've not been a fan of,
I know.
This, you and I've talked about this for years. Everybody thinks that I'm all in on, every war in the Middle East, but I've been for years saying, you don't want to get into a war with yet another large, 3 times the size of Iraq, and have to deal with that. But whether you think it was a good idea or not, from Trump's point of view, it's gotten him nothing.
No.
It's gotten him, embarrassment and so what is his relationship with Netanyahu? He's been in a war. He joined in on a war that's been, to say the least, inconclusive, and the Israelis, and I shouldn't say the Israelis. This is Netanyahu and people around him,
right,
are pursuing this ghastly war in Gaza that has become, I think, there's evidence of war crimes. It's a terrible. It's just terrible black eye for Israel. And again, Trump has to be sitting there watching, saying, "What am I getting out of this? What has my unequivocal support of this guy bought me?" And the answer is heartburn, just pure heartburn.
Yeah. Well, this is part of the problem that the pictures coming out of Gaza are so horrific, and whatever word you want to use, and I've never used the word genocide, but I have used the word atrocity here. We're talking about I want to make it very clear. I have no trust at all in Hamas. I'm very, very skeptical of the UN and some of the numbers that they have. But it's very obvious that we're talking about tens of thousands of civilian casualties, lots of children. Whether it's 50 or 60,000. And I just keep coming back to how much goodwill, international goodwill, after October 7th, Benjamin Netanyahu has squandered, and the way, and a lot of us have been trying to separate our longtime support of Israel from this particular Netanyahu regime with its extreme right-wing cabinet and everything. But it feels, and I use the word monstrous. And I think this was a just war in the beginning, the response. I think it was completely legitimate. Israel has a right to exist and defend itself. And yet, at what point do you step back and you go, hey, I really like you guys. I support Israel. I want to be an ally of the Jewish people. But this is not sustainable. This is horrible. And the whole world is watching what's happening, and they are appalled by it. What is your take on this?
I think, first of all, your point about this being a just war is really important. I mean, after October 7th, I think, like most people, I said, of course you have to go to war. Of course you do.
Yeah. Right.
That was the point. That attack was meant to spark a war. But it was a terrible miscalculation by the leaders of Hamas. But a year and a half, almost 2 years later, asking as you do, okay, what is the objective here? I mean, if this is, what is the strategic objective of this kind of just, pulverizing Gaza? And I took a lot of heat on social media because having taught international relations and taught at a war college, I am a stickler about the word genocide. I still don't use that word for what's happening. But war crimes, I think there's, there have been this is out of control, and I don't understand what the goal is now.
What is the end game?
Well, I have to think that this is all bound up in Netanyahu's personal political troubles.
That's what makes this so monstrous, right? If he's continuing this, if he is doing this in order to protect his own ass, because he knows that when the war is over, he'll be tossed out of office and might face, prison time. So therefore, he's what? And not to mention this balancing act with these really, I mean, we're talking about some really extreme folks in this cabinet. It's so this is why I think you're seeing public opinion shifting on this. And I think there may be a generational shift here, that Israel has counted upon international support, has counted on American support. And they may think of this as just sort of an ephemeral blip, but I don't think it is. If they don't figure out a way to resolve this.
They haven't learned anything from our experience with 9/11, which was the whole world was on our side, and we squandered that. And there's just no way around. It's that we never again had the benefit of the doubt. After, especially after the invasion of Iraq, and I think that should have been an object lesson, that you can, when you have the world on your side, when you've been wronged, when you've been attacked so brutally, you can embark on a just war. But I mean, that, October 7th now is already kind of, again, like 9/11. It's receding far enough into the past for people watching this to say, why are we still watching the rubble bounce?
Right.
So I don't, but I think I just don't. Going back to the question about Trump, I think regardless of why Israel's doing this, regardless of why Netanyahu's doing this, if you're wondering what's going on with Trump, I think it's because he's figured out, of all the transactional deals he makes, this one just isn't working out for him. It's not. He doesn't. The thing about Trump is he doesn't ever want to be standing next to somebody who's getting heat brought down on them. Right. We've seen this here at home all the time, right? About, hey, who ordered who ordered the pause in Ukraine? Well, you tell me. Why
so
can't
weird.
the DOJ? I know, right? He's the president. Why can't the DOJ release these records? Well, I don't have anything to do with that.
Yeah,
You're the freaking president. Of course you do. But that's very much a Trump thing that, whenever one of his friends is in trouble,
he backs away.
He steps out into the lobby and says, I hardly know the guy.
Yeah. I mean, by the time this is over,
happened.
he's say, who's this Netanyahu guy? Didn't he get coffee? All right. So now, speaking of military, I wanted to get your take on something that I've seen you write about. And it's it seems like kind of a strange story where Donald Trump now is insisting on interviewing all 4-star generals to make sure that they are all war fighters. So again, talk to me about that a little bit. And clearly there's a real obsession with purging the military West Point of anyone whose loyalty to Donald Trump is questionable. But this personal interview with the 4-star generals, what does that tell you, Tom?
It tells me that he wants to build a cadre of senior officers who feel that their position is entirely dependent on him and that their views are completely in sync with his, not about strategic issues, but about personal political issues. He has dumped every female leader in the military out.
Mm-hmm.
All of his future nominees are men, mostly white, middle-aged white guys, as
right.
as senior officers often are. But this, that I hate these Hitler analogies and I push back on, 1933. But there is a kind of Fuhrer oath feel to this one. Before you become the most senior rank of an American officer, you and I need to take a walk, on the South Lawn, and, you need to tell me where your heart's at. And that is utterly contrary to the American system of civil military relations. Now, Trump, I suppose the Trump folks could say, well, the president nominates these people. Yes.
Right.
He nominates them, but based on their military achievements and their merit and their record, not on whether they took a walk together, around the grounds.
Well,
and the guy said, sir, you're my guy, with tears in my eyes, sir. Remember, and this is really important, he tried to depict General Kane that way, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He said, this guy, he wore a MAGA hat, and he said, sir, I would kill for you. Now, Kane, if I have to pick between General Kane and the president about who's telling the truth, I'm going to pick Dan Kane. But Kane had to back away from that really fast. So that wasn't me. I didn't do that. But it tells you something that Donald Trump wanted to appoint a chairman of the Joint Chiefs who he thinks
was loyal to him. But, and again, this walk around that they're taking, I do wonder whether explicitly or implicitly the question is, and if I give you an order, even an illegal order, can I be sure that you will follow my order, that you will do whatever I say? Because this has been an obsession of Donald Trump's for some time, right? Is that he wants generals. He likes the idea of generals, but he wants generals who will do what he says, even if it's illegal. And so they went through and they fired a lot of the lawyers, the people who advise generals, who advise colonels.
First, we kill all the lawyers.
Well, that's usually a good idea, but in this particular case, he's cleared it out where generals have to, obey only lawful orders. They have to obey a lawful order, but they can say, "I'm sorry, that is not a lawful order." So, two things: who's going to tell them that anymore?
Who's going to?
And have they basically been vetted in such a way that whatever he tells them to do, that they will do? And so, I mean, this again is one of those really dangerous moments. We do have civilian control of the military. It's a fundamental principle, but we've never had the military, the generals have to swear basically an oath of allegiance to one political figure. And that's what's frightening.
We don't have to guess at this, Charlie, because he had the same conversation with Jim Comey.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, exactly.
Remember, they had dinner and he was like, I need to know, I always think of, because that I only live through pop culture. I always think of Jack Palance and Batman, saying, "You are my number one guy." That I gotta know that you're my guy. And I suspect what will happen, as is happening in so many parts of the government, is that these men, because they will all be men, Trump's not going to elevate. I actually pointed out, there are no currently serving 4-star female officers, none, in the military.
You would think that would be more controversial. You would think that would be a bigger story.
Well, if people knew about it, yes.
Yeah.
But there are no currently serving female 4-stars. So these men, I suspect what will happen is they will manage up the way everybody has to with Trump, where he says, "Oh, you're got to be my guy." And I'm sure, "Well, sir, I serve the Constitution and the president, the orders of the president, and lawful orders." And, I think anybody who gets interviewed by him it's going to be just an obstacle course, like the way Comey had to deal with dinner, that you're just kind of walking through this minefield, but
you hope they're skillful enough to do that, right?
Right. Yeah. But the two things that worry me the most are that that Trump will unearth some 2 or 3-star who he wants to promote, who says, "Finally, a president who gets me," and
right,
and that I can love, or that, as you point out, that these will be weak-willed enough careerists who will say, "All right, I can manage this, I guess." But then when the rubber meets the road, are going to say, "I, don't really have that ability to stand up and say, I'm not doing that."
Well, I mean, remember, this is kind of a throwback to the first term. Do you remember? Maybe it was even in the first campaign where Trump was openly saying that, that we would kill terrorists' families. We'd basically go out and commit war crimes. And he's had a thing for war criminals and people who have been accused of atrocities. And so he said that he would, tell the military to go kill their families. And there was some pushback saying, well, that would the military, do that? And remember what Trump's answer was? They'll do anything I tell them to do. Now, at that time, there were still enough norms or whatever for people to push back and say, no, the military would not commit an atrocity like that. I just don't know. But in Donald Trump's mind, he is thinking of all of these scenarios. He's thinking this way, and he just does not want a general ever to say, "Mr. President, we can't do that. That would be illegal or unconstitutional." And that's what's scary. Okay, speaking of scary.
Can I make one more point about the generals?
Yeah, sure.
Which is, there was this boilerplate nonsense about, well, we have to make sure they're war fighters and not bureaucrats.
Yes.
First of all, every 4-star general has been to reach 4 stars. You've had to be a successful bureaucrat, because I don't know what these guys, what Hegseth or anybody else thinks a 4-star does, but they don't, they don't step out in the battlefield, or ride out there on their horse and draw their sword. That's not what a 4-star does. They are, and I would recommend that people read, many possibilities. Read Tony Zinni's memoirs. They are bureaucrats. They are diplomats. They are politicians. They are military leaders. They are strategists. If a 4-star is out there on the field issuing operational orders, then that's a bad 4-star. There's a whole bunch of people underneath him that are supposed to be doing that. And this notion that we're going to interview them and make sure that they're, blood and guts and, patent directing traffic, in the muddy fields of France, that's horseshit. That's not what a 4-star general or admiral is supposed to be doing. And that worries me as well. Because that's just a misunderstanding of the job.
But that's probably the movie that Donald Trump has seen. He thinks it's Patton directing traffic. Okay, so speaking of scary, and this relates to all of this, is the role of Laura Loomer. And this goes in the category of, I thought it would be bad, and I have to admit I didn't think it was going to be this bad. I mean, she has described her last September as, the bigoted, freaky, new BFF of Donald Trump. I mean, a woman who is so far out there. I mean, even Marjorie Taylor Greene thinks she's a racist. And now I think you could argue that she is as influential as anyone on the outside in terms of the personnel decisions. She, you know, she you know,
de facto vetting.
Yes, and I mean they just nixed some, you know, major West Point appointment of a woman, a highly qualified woman. But so if you are Loomered in the Trump administration, you're dead. I mean, the fact that Laura Loomer, and I cannot stress how insane this woman is, that she has this kind of power is horrific, especially when you start thinking about how, you know, important some of these jobs are, how sensitive they are, and how little she's concerned about whether they are competent. But she goes to daddy and says, look, I found somebody else who's been naughty. You know, I found somebody else who's been disloyal. I found somebody else who did or said something that you won't like. See. And this is the coin of the realm in this regime.
Can I, you know, Charlie, in a strange way, can I say that I'm almost like you? Let me back up and say, like you, I just didn't think. I thought, okay, Laura Loomer, she got her one shot. She got an audience in the Oval. She knocked off a couple of guys in the National Security Council. But, you know, this is basically a conspiracy theorist, internet influencer, a person
embarrassing.
Embarrassing. I mean, just could not possibly imagine this person, you know, in the West Wing ever. Okay. But now that it's gotten to this, there's a part of me that says, you know, those of you that threw in your lot with Donald Trump thinking, you know, well, I will affect policy. I will be, you know, the guy that, you know, behind the scenes,
right.
You know, I think it's really kind of in a way great to say, no, your career, your mortgage, your future depends on Laura Loomer. And this is what you deserve. Because this is this whole carny, you know, this whole carnival midway of weirdos, you know, that Trump has empowered, you know, that has cost even for people who are in the show, you know, even for people who are the exhibits. Right. And I think, you know, it's terrifying. I shouldn't say it's terrifying. I mean, this whole thing is terrifying because it says that nobody, I keep wondering who's running the government in the middle of all this chaos and idiocy. But you know, there is a part of me that says, oh, you thought you had a career with that by joining the Trump train, by getting, you know, by going down the midway and putting on the straw hat and getting that you were safe. No, you're not. And this is the price that you pay.
And the Senate is letting him get along, you know, getting away with it. I mean, I think this week was, in some ways, a clarifying moment for anyone who thought that the Senate, you know, might exert some sort of a tempering effect on all of this. You know, when they confirmed Emil Bove to the Court of Appeals, and then I think even worse. I mean, that was worse. I mean, that was terrible. This is the, you know, deeply unqualified former criminal attorney for Donald Trump, who was just basically a thug and a hack. And yet they rolled over and they confirmed him, despite all of the folks saying, no, you know, whistleblowers coming forward, whatever. Even in some ways, even worse, this guy, Joe Kent, who was confirmed by the Senate to be like this head of this counterintelligence, whatever. I mean, Joe Kent.
National Counterterrorism Center.
Yeah, the
There's
national
no business being there.
I mean, Joe Kent was a disgraced former congressional candidate, and to say that the paper trail on his racism, association with white nationalist conspiracy theories, it is just so long. If there was anyone that the Senate would say, yeah, no, it would be him. But this is a Senate that's confirmed Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard and Pete Hegseth, and you just keep going down the list. And the confirmation of someone like Joe Kent, you would be embarrassed to have him in your house. You would be embarrassed to, you know, be in the same office with this guy. And yet, you know, they roll over and they confirm him, is another indication. Talk about capitulation, but also that there are no checks on what Donald Trump is doing, and the Senate has just essentially completely surrendered advice and consent. If they think those nominees, if you voted for Tulsi Gabbard, if you vote for Joe Kent, if you vote for Emil Bove, you're basically saying, fuck it, I just want to be a senator.
That's
right. I mean,
what it always comes down to, Charlie. I like the job. People bring me coffee. I keep saying this. Why would you vote to confirm, Beauvais or Kent? Because I like it that people bring me coffee in the morning. I like it that somebody picks me up for work and drives me.
It's better than that. Do you know that? And I had a former friend who was a senator who was like really amused by this at one time before he became insane. We don't have to mention any names like Ron Johnson. That when a senator is crossing the street, they will stop traffic for a United States senator. The cops will say, "Oh, but Senator, okay, you don't have to wait for a red light. You just do that. Get used to that kind of shit."
My worst senator story, and I can tell it because he's dead, was apparently like the most dictatorial senator like this that I knew back in my day on the Hill was Arlen Specter, who once he picked up, this was a legendary story. He picks up a sandwich, he bites into it, and this like glop of mustard or mayonnaise or something falls on his tie, and he turns and he reams out an aide by saying, "I told you, I can't believe this. I told you I wanted my sandwiches pre-squeezed."
Jesus.
I wanted to. Oh yeah, I mean, if you handed him a newspaper,
ask for that from now on. No,
I want my sandwiches free. I'm going to ask for that. If an aide read the paper before the senator did and handed it to him, he threw it back at him, wants fresh paper. It's good to be a senator. It's a good life. It doesn't suck. But I think the other thing,
Charlie, my sandwich is squeezed. I just, I mean,
it was such It was such a. Of course, we were in the other senator from Pennsylvania's office, so we weren't going to
heard all that stuff.
Talk out of turn about our colleague from Pennsylvania. But
I would think a rock star would be embarrassed to say in his contract, "I want this number of jelly beans, and I want this kind of Evian water, and I want all of my sandwiches to be pre-squeezed." I think that would be like too far.
Hey, but again, the other half of this equation, Charlie, is not just that it's a good life to be a senator and you get your sandwiches just the way you want them, and your newspapers are always fresh and crisp, but also they're afraid of their own constituents.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise, why did Tom Tillis fall into line? He's leaving. Everybody makes these big declarations of conscience. Well, I'm finally out. I can't vote for. I can't be a part. And then they do it anyway because they fear having to go home and be there. I think we're underestimating the actual physical fear of violence that some of these legislators have, as well as the kind of less likely but more overarching problem of just social opprobrium that they would face back in their districts.
Yes, they're afraid of being yelled at in the deli, or they're being yelled at in the airport.
Hounded through the airport, exactly.
So you like the pop culture. The best line from the first Ghostbusters movie. Remember the very, very best line when I think it was Dan Aykroyd, is referring to the bad guy in that movie, by the way, is an EPA agent, which I always found interesting. I think he's talking to the mayor of New York or whatever, and he's describing the EPA agent, and he says, "Yes, sir, this man has no dick."
Yeah.
And Tom Tillis has done this over and over and over again. Do you remember in Trump 1.0, he actually wrote an op-ed piece like, "I cannot go along with this, bogus declaration of an emergency to fund the border wall." He actually writes an op-ed saying why he was going to vote against this. And then like a week later, he votes for it because, well, he's Tom Tillis. Okay.
Well, because but also the senators are speaking to two audiences. They come out and they say, my conscience, for people who read newspapers, right? I am making a declaration that my conscience is bothering me. But when it comes time, and I actually have to go back to back home to Carolina and face my vote, I'd say, well, I voted against it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's right.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that the answer, Charlie, is to say, what? Fuck it. I just want to be a senator. And I think also I think there is also some, and I'm just trying to do mind reading here at this point, but I wonder if there's some part of them that says, "Oh, you want this guy to be the head of the NCTC? No, I'm not going to take the heat for it. So I'm going to vote for it. And then when he crashes and burns, as he will, you can't come at me and say, I did what the president wanted. I mean, look at Dan Bongino. Bongino didn't need Senate confirmation, but the funniest thing about Dan Bongino is he's found out that going to work every day in the federal government is hard. It's not fun. It's boring. Yes. It's like, God, I used to be able to sit at a microphone and be a podcaster and say all kinds of crazy shit all day.
Dan is going through some things. He's going through some things. It's really, really sad. Okay, so this is a good segue into the story about the tariffs and the tacos and everything, because I saw a tweet from somebody that I respect very much. Who said, Trump is imposing all these vast new tariffs. Nobody quite understands why or where they're going, and he posted, Congress could put an end to this, in one day. I mean, the Constitution makes it very, very clear that Congress has the power to levy tariffs. It's not something that was designed to be unilateral, and yet Congress has surrendered that power, given the president power. And the chance that Congress would actually step in and say, hey, we are actually a co-equal branch of government is absolutely zero. It is sub-zero that they have surrendered this. So give me your just take on the latest Liberation Day that we had on Friday, where we had the shitty job numbers, the stock market crash, and yet Donald Trump is just rolling ahead, threatening allies, slapping huge tariffs on, our enemies in Canada, tacoing on China and Mexico?
Well, two things. First of all, nobody, and I think this is probably true of 99% of the people on Trump's team, nobody thinks tariffs are a good idea except Donald Trump, because he doesn't understand them. He doesn't understand how they work. Like so many things, Donald Trump has had this one fixed idea for 40 years that tariffs are a way that you prize money out of difficult countries. And he just doesn't, I think he genuinely just doesn't understand how they work. And he likes the idea of saying, I'll slap a tariff on you and then you beg me and make a deal and you come and kiss the ring. And okay. So that's just, the things that experts, let me just defend the experts, that the thing that the experts warned would happen if you did all this stuff is happening. All right. Inflation is climbing again. Job growth is slowing. Unemployment and inflation are both up. I still think in my world at tolerable levels, but they're going the wrong direction. He has no learning curve. But when it comes to Congress and this power, this is not new with Trump. Congress has offloaded all difficult things to the executive branch for decades now. The whole issue of war powers, right? The authors when Trump bombed Iran, I was one of the few people, for one of the few times in my life, I was saying, I have a pretty expansive view of Article 2 and the commander-in-chief power, and I'm not sure that just lets you say, today I'm going to bomb Iran. Normally you do it, you go to the Security Council or you invoke Article 50. You do something that at least puts a fig leaf on this. You can't just say, well, today I've just decided is the right day to bomb Iran. But Congress doesn't want that power, Charlie. Even in the 90s, when they were talking about really strengthening, fixing, because I think the War Powers Act is probably unconstitutional, to be honest with you. But you could fix it. You could say, look, we're not going to do these shoddy AUMFs and these kind of make-believe, Congress doesn't want the power. They don't want the responsibility.
They don't want the responsibility. They may like the trappings of power, but they don't want the actual responsibility. Okay, so one last thing. Clearly, this is, I don't know whether we consider this a joke or not, but you saw that you posted on this. Donald Trump is really obsessed with getting the Nobel Peace Prize, isn't he? He went through a riff where he said, I solved this conflict. I solved this conflict. I solved this. And I think you posted something like, don't laugh because his supporters are actually believing it. I don't know. Yeah. But it is interesting. This is one of the ideas that is stuck in his head, that he wants the Nobel Prize. I'm going to go out on a limb and bet that the folks that hand out the Nobel Prize are not going to cave into him. They are not going to give him this.
I don't think the guys in Oslo are sitting there saying, well, we better make a deal with Donald Trump. Yeah. He has no notion that because he is a goldfish and he darts from thing to thing, he doesn't understand that bombing Iran and then, and telling Netanyahu, go ahead and finish the job, and telling Putin that he has 50 days to do whatever the hell he wants, that those things don't factor well into, well, I brokered an agreement in Africa. And the other thing is that he doesn't understand that America being involved in disputes and being a diplomatic kind of good faith partner in these things is normal. That's how it's supposed to work. You don't get the Nobel Prize as a superpower for just showing up to work every day. I think it just sticks in his craw. And I come back to this. I know that there are other reports out there that Trump did not run because Obama humiliated him. I think he ran because Obama humiliated him.
Oh, yeah. I do.
And Obama has a Nobel Prize and he has to have one. This is how his mind works. I have to have these merit badges. I have to have, if other guys have trophy wives, I have to have a trophy wife. Other guys have, their names on Sky. I have to put my name on one. He everything about him, and this is something you and I have talked about, and it's something I will never understand about his supporters. They think of him as very confident and manly. To me, everything that comes out of him is very childlike and insecure.
Yes.
He's
man
like the
child,
kid,
man baby.
Yeah. He's like that kid at the school, auditorium get together where he's watching all the other kids get a trophy and he's thinking, where's my letter? Well, you weren't on any of the teams. Yeah, but Trump's the kind of guy that would, if he in high school would buy, I just think he's that kind of guy. He'd say, well, I didn't letter anything, but I'm just going to buy the sweater and stick one on there because I deserve it too. He's very
that doesn't
obsessed
even seem like a reach, if we found out that he did, when he was.
Well, the fake Time magazine cover.
Barron,
right?
Yeah, so
the
that's
Time
a perfect
cover.
example.
Yeah.
He didn't get on the Time magazine cover, so he just made up a Time magazine cover.
So hung it on his wall.
On brand for this guy. All right. Is there anything that we're missing? Anything we haven't talked about? We've managed to get through virtually the entire podcast without mentioning Sydney Sweeney because other people have got that handled. I'm going to admit, we were going to leave this one in the green room. Don't
admit think
it.
I should.
Don't. Go ahead, do it.
Charlie, I don't know. I am 64 years old. I think I am well plugged into the popular culture, but I admit that I don't know who Sydney Sweeney is or why she's famous. I don't get it. I finally know that she exists, and I looked her up, and apparently she's an actress. And okay, but to me, every time I saw this stuff about it's just gone right past me, and I didn't understand why she or her endowments were an issue. And I still don't. You had to explain it to me just before we started this podcast.
Yeah, and no, the pun about jeans is not a sign of support for white supremacy, eugenics, or Nazis. And if someone in your circle will argue that it is, you probably ought to think your life choices. So anyway, but there's your assignment for the weekend. You can spend your time learning more about Sydney Sweeney, which again is important. Tom Nichols.
Thanks, Charlie.
You know what? We all need a break from all of this. Tom, thanks. And thank you all for listening to this episode of To the Contrary podcast. We're going to continue to do this until everybody absolutely understands that we are not the crazy ones.